Prayers certainly go out to anyone who was affected by today's storm. I'm Megan. I'm one of the ABA program managers here, and it truly is one of my passions, as well as the other clinicians that are here tonight, to work alongside parents and caregivers and each other to make sure that we are producing the best outcomes. So I'm really grateful for opportunities like this where we can all get together. I want to mention Morgan Junker. She's the president of our Parent Support Committee, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, but I wanted to acknowledge all the hard work that she did putting into this event and all the work she does to support our community. Also want to thank and introduce Rebecca Connick. Rebecca has volunteered to be our speaker tonight. Rebecca is an occupational therapist here at Crane, and she is trained in the SOS approach to feeding, and she's going to be talking to you tonight about those principles of that approach. We do have some time for Q&A at the end, so I ask that you hold your questions until then. Thank you, and I give you Rebecca Connick.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about strategies to expand your child's diet, the SOS approach to feeding, and I do know that there are going to be questions, and I would love to chat with you about your specific child and your specific needs, so make sure to grab me at the end, but we'll get started. Let me get my clicker. So what is the SOS approach? The SOS approach to feeding, it was started by Dr. Kay Toomey, and she's a psychologist that's worked with kids with feeding difficulties for over 30 years. And in her work, she recognized the need for a program to help these picky eaters and these problem feeders. It was a really significant difficulty. So what she did is she came up with a sequential oral sensory approach. Not so coincidentally, save our ship, SOS. Feeding is stressful and feeding is hard when your kid doesn't eat. And the approach basically, it facilitates children using all of their senses to learn about their food in order to progress up the steps of eating. And the most important parts of this approach is that it's playful. It's playful and positive. And I definitely have used this approach with a lot of success. And I went to a 4-day course to learn all about it. I could have talked about it for months, but I'll kind of go over a little bit here. Our objectives are going to be to discuss the reasons why children won't eat. We're going to debunk some common myths, as well as introduce you to the sequential oral sensory approach. And then I want to provide some useful strategies for you at home, for you to use easily at your dinner table. And then we're going to address some common problems, the things that come up often. Now I do want to mention, as I kind of go through the presentation, please don't go home and change everything at one time. Eating is stressful for a lot of these kids, so we don't want to bombard them with changes. Really, one change at a time is great, and I can kind of help facilitate you through that if you have specific questions about that. A couple of disclaimers. This itself is not a certification course. I'm certified to use the SOS approach, but it's really an involved process, an involved program that takes a lot of planning and a lot of direction. So if you are interested in the SOS approach, feel free to seek out some more services to kind of bring you through that. And if you're concerned about your child's feeding, I cannot stress to you enough that the first step is contacting your pediatrician. It's really, really important to have our pediatricians on our team to address feeding. And what I did here is I posted this website that has a questionnaire, and it really helps bring up those red flags for you to start that conversation with your pediatrician. So first, let's take a deep breath. Because feeding is so stressful when your child won't eat. So I recognize that, and I hope that this presentation is helpful. So picky eaters versus problem feeders, there is a difference, and I want to go over it today. Our picky eaters are those kids that eat at least 30 foods or more, whereas our problem feeders are those who eat less than 20. So that's an important distinction. Another important one is that usually our picky eaters can tolerate a new food on their plate. Maybe we'll put a new food on their plate and they're okay with it, whereas our problem feeders completely fall apart and break down with the presentation of new foods. Picky eaters, foods lost to burnout are regained. Some of our picky eaters might go through phases of food, but they'll bring them back. Whereas problem feeders, if they lose a food, often they don't come back, or they'll take a really long time to come back. And our picky eaters and problem feeders, the difference between them is most significant in that our picky eaters eat at least one food from every food group and every food texture group, and this is huge. So our problem feeders are those who exclude entire food textures and entire nutrition groups. So say I have a child that eats an apple and a carrot. Those are the only two of the fruit and vegetable. That's a lot better than completely removing a texture group or a food group such as vegetables or fruit. And this is where that pediatrician comes in, because we really need to make sure that our kids are being monitored based on the things that they're lacking in their diet. So the important thing about this is that our problem feeders, these are the kids that we need to see as soon as possible. These are the kids that are having a lot of difficulty eating, and that's something that's very significant when you eat less than 20 foods. So this presentation can help both these groups of children, but I just want to let you know if this problem feeder sounds like your child, come talk to us at the end. We can provide you some further resources. Reasons our children won't eat. First, you have pain and discomfort. A lot of our picky eaters started out as reflux kids, as babies, and reflux is rampant. And so after you eat, if what happens is that you feel sick and you have indigestion and you have GI problems, you're not going to be motivated to eat. And the same thing with constipation, the same thing with other GI problems. It's not very motivating to eat when food makes you feel bad. Immature motor skills. This is something that our OTs and speech therapists are really keen and know how to look at, but if you have a motor difficulty eating, also not motivation to eat. If it's physically difficult for you to manipulate the food in your mouth, it's not going to be that motivated to eat. Sensory processing problems. This is another big one. Food involves all of our senses. We think about it, so if we have a difficulty with sensory processing, we're going to have a difficulty with eating. And learning and behavioral. That's a really important one too. We have Katie and Megan here who are BCBAs, our behavior analysts, and they are very helpful when it comes to behavior incorporated in eating. It's always a factor. So love this quote by Dr. Toomey. Every meal is class. The parents are the professors, the children are the students, and food is the subject. This little girl is learning about her food. And what's important is that we want our parents to teach about food. When we have meals, we want mealtime to be an opportunity to learn. So I'm going to start with our myths. Top 10 myths of mealtime. Myth number 1, eating is the body's #1 priority. Not true. Obviously, our body's #1 priority is breathing. Number 2 is posture. So when we want to protect the brain, we don't want to fall on our head, right? So posture is really a priority of our body. And if we're a kiddo that has low tone or core weakness, and that in itself is hard work, then that comes before eating. So what we want to do is we want to sit in our chair with a 90-90-90 position. We want our back to our legs to be 90 degrees, our knees bent at 90, and then our feet supported. So that is something really useful for our parents to look at with mealtime. Is our kiddo supported in the chair that they're eating in? Myth number 2, eating is instinctive. Appetite is only instinctive for the first 4 to 6 weeks of life. When we're infants, from when we're born to 4 to 6 weeks, eating is instinctive. When we move from 4 to 6 weeks to 4 to 6 months, we transition to use our primitive motor reflexes. You might know these as the rooting reflex when you brush the cheek, the internal turn to the nipple, or the sucking reflex, suck, swallow, breathe. All of that is coordinated with reflexes. But after 4 to 6 months, eating is voluntary. Eating is completely voluntary, and that's where we'll see a lot of feeding issues start in some of these kids, is about that age when solid foods are introduced. So if there is a breakdown with any of the skills up to this point, the kids don't have the instinct to help them to eat. They have to learn how to eat, and they have to have the skills. Eating is easy. Eating is actually one of the only activities that requires all of your senses. Think about food: touch, taste, sight, and smell of the food. Combined with where you are sitting in the chair. Are you hungry? Are you full? Are you kind of constipated? All of these things really go into eating, and so if we have a breakdown in any one of these areas, it's going to affect our eating. Not easy. Myth number 4, eating is a 2-step process. You sit down and you eat. I'd like to refer to you to the SOS approach to feeding, that eating is actually a 32-step process. And I don't want to overwhelm you with this. You have the handout on your chair. This is really just to show you what goes into eating, so we know what our kids are having to do and what they're coming up against. So before we get to eating, we have all of these other steps. It starts with tolerating the food, interacting with the food, then smelling, then touching, then tasting, then eating. So it's a big process. So if we find ourselves getting frustrated, it's very easy to get frustrated with our kiddos, but just keep in mind, it's a long process. It is not okay to play with your food. This little cutie here is learning all about his food. He is feeling the food, it's on his mouth, he's probably tasting it, he's smelling it for sure, it's all over his nose. It is developmentally appropriate to play with your food when you're a baby. So if we think about our picky eaters and our problem feeders, a lot of them might not have ever done this, or might not have liked messy play, or might not have liked to have their food all over. So when we think about eating and what we want to do to help kids build up those skills, playing and messy play is so important. Play is the most effective way to teach the skill of eating, and I definitely have seen this working with these kids. Play just is huge when it comes to encouraging them to try and to eat new foods and to move up those steps. child is hungry enough, he or she will eat. They will not starve themselves. This is important again, bring in that pediatrician. If your child is leaving out entire food nutrition groups and entire food groups, they definitely can be lacking in some of these minerals and some of these vitamins. So making sure that you're talking with your pediatrician about this and following where they are in the growth chart is really important in recognizing how to help them. Myth number 7, children only need to eat 3 times a day. Actually, after about 18 months of age, for children and adults as well, it's helpful to eat every 2.5 to 3 hours. So what this means for our picky eaters, a lot of times we want to do naturally is have food available for them all the time. And this is maybe counterproductive because studies show that when we have grazing as we call it, when we have food just out because we're so desperate for them to eat anything that we want to just have it available for when they will, grazing actually, all the kids do is really cut the edge off their hunger, and they actually are shown to eat 50% less. So if we want our children to eat more, what's important is not having it always available. What's important is a structure, is a schedule. So say we wake up and then we have a set time for mid-morning snack, for lunch, for dinner. If we have that structure, it helps with both our appetite, getting ready for the next meal, and it also eliminates that grazing that we're so prone to kind of try with these kids when we're desperate to have them eat. Then number 8, a child who won't eat either has a behavioral or an organic problem. So, like I said, skill development is so important in eating, as is behavior. So really when we have a difficulty, you'll see here, if our behavior is eating, and if we have a consequence that could be either desirable or undesirable, that's what influences our result. So say our behavior is eating, we have an undesirable consequence, which is that we're having a sensory issue, we gag, we choke, it's very difficult motor-wise to manipulate it in our mouth. The behavior is that we're going to eat less. We're not going to be motivated to eat. So what we can do, and what the SOS approach is about, is that if we're eating, and we have a desirable consequence, we have praise from mom and dad, attention, a party is thrown with every bite you take, and fun, then our eating, we want to eat more. We're motivated to eat more. Our behavior increases. And the same can be said. If our behavior is refusing foods, refusing to sit at mealtime, and we get a lot of attention, or we're able to escape that demand, or if we're just given the food that we wanted all along, we're going to refuse more. So this is just very important, these behavioral concepts when it comes to eating, because you can see how it can lead to either eating more or eating less. Myth number 9, certain foods are only eating at specified times of the day, and only certain foods are healthy for you. So when we think about the foods that we traditionally eat, we eat all these meats, mixed textures, vegetables, salads. Everything that we eat at dinner is so mechanically hard to chew. Everything we eat for breakfast, eggs, waffles, pancakes, all of that is very easy to chew and easy to manipulate. So we have the hardest foods at the hardest time of the day for these kids after an exhausting day. So what I just want y'all to know is that we can mix it up. No food is off limits. Different cultures eat different foods, incorporate some of those. There's a lot of crazy protein type snacks that maybe you wouldn't think about. And we also can, it's okay to have breakfast for dinner. Use those easy foods at the harder time of the day. And I want to have a line in here about junk foods too. Junk foods, we don't necessarily deem them junk foods. They're stepping stone foods. They're room for growth. So junk foods, if you think about it, are quality controlled to look the same, to smell the same, to taste the same, every single time. So if our kids are gravitating towards these packaged foods or these junk foods, it's because they know exactly what they're going to get. They know what they're going to get and what it's going to taste like, what it's going to smell like every single time. So what we want to do is for our junk foods, that's okay that they have a food like that in their diet, but we want to jump from that. We want to expand from that. And I'll go into a little bit how we can do that. Myth number 10, meal times are a proper social occasion. Children are to mind their manners at all meals. I understand manners are so important, and there's sometimes that kids literally will not be able to play with their food. We're out eating dinner, whatever the circumstance is. But when we're learning how to eat, like I said before, messy play is so important that what I recommend for my picky eaters and my problem feeders is that we address that first if our child isn't eating, and then we will teach those manners. So really, I encourage messy play, playing with food at the dinner table. So when we get into the SOS approach, you can refer to your steps of eating. Those are the ones that are used in order to find where the child is at with each particular food and then help move them up slowly in a positive and playful way. It's really important also that it's multisensory. We want these kids to experience all of the food, whether the smell, the taste, the texture, all of it, what it's like when it's crunched up, what it's like when it's chewed. And if the child can't tolerate a step, it's okay to move down. So if we find ourselves that we're stuck at a certain step, the kid will be ready to move up after enough exposure and after enough play with it. So it's okay to find where they're at on the steps and then help them progress forward. And like I said before, we want food to be fun. And for a lot of our picky eaters and our problem eaters, eating and food is not fun, right? For whatever reason, if it's sensory, if it's motor, if it's just an overall stress and a struggle every mealtime, the most important part about the SOS approach is that mealtime needs to be fun. So like I said before, here are steps to eating. What I usually do for my kiddos and what you can do too to kind of help you, I guess, find a way and a structure to progress, I usually put a line in about where exactly the kid falls when they start eating. So I present the food in front of them. What is their first reaction? Maybe they tolerate it on their table. Maybe they go right ahead and touch it. So meeting where your child is at with that particular food, even if it's just being in the room or even if it's just maybe being in the house with the food, that's okay. Mark where they are, and then that way you can work to progress up. So a key principle to the SOS approach is exposure. We want our kids to be exposed to all kinds of foods all the time. Studies show that it takes at least 10 times of a food being completely eaten, chewed, and swallowed for that food to be consistently eaten. And what I guess the important part of this here is that understanding that even if it's frustrating that you present your child with this food twice, 5 times, however many times, and stay the course. Exposure is important. It takes a long time for these kids to incorporate these foods into their diet. So just my advice to parents is just let's stay the course here because it takes so many times. In children's older than 7, it takes even longer. So the key is exposure. Now, when I talk about mealtime, the first thing I want to talk about is the cues to eating. Things to consider about what's in the room, who's in the room, where does the child sit all the time, what plates, what utensils, what dishes we use. So when it comes to eating, if mealtime's a negative thing, if it's not really a successful experience for you and your family, let's change something up. If our kids are getting stuck, let's change the cues. That way it kind of frees them up for new behavior. So like I said before, we don't want to change everything at once, but maybe changing little Johnny's position at the table can help mealtime just have a different start and to have a different setup. Another great way, I guess, when we talk about feeding and encouraging children to manipulate food, meal prep. Meal prep is a great way to provide exposure of different foods to your child. And it can be adapted to any age kiddo. If it's that young kid, you just need help mixing and they touch it, they're already smelling it, manipulating it. Or if it's an older kid, kitchen tools are fun. Using the potato peeler, chopping when appropriate. All of those things are ways that the child is interacting with the food before they're ever expected to eat it. And this is huge because for these kids, this expectation of eating this food almost instantly leads to shutdown. So if we have a fun and a playful environment while we're prepping the food, we're cooking with mom or dad or grandma, grandpa, whomever, they already are getting exposure to all of these foods so that by the time they sit down for dinner, they already know what it feels like, what it smells like, maybe what it tastes like if they taste it while it was cooking. So they might enter in a higher stage on the steps to eating if we do a meal prep activity before it. And this is a really great way that I always recommend to my parents about facilitating good eating. Family meals. This is so stressful because when is anybody ever home at the same time? But family meals are really important. Those old-fashioned, everybody's sitting around the table, whomever is able to. And we're sitting down and we're passing the foods. Having a true mealtime experience where the kid isn't the focus, but the food is, right? We talk about the food. We concentrate on the food. We keep mealtime positive. We can definitely have goals of that mealtime. It doesn't have to be therapy per se, but you can have goals. One of the really big things that I love to encourage is passing around foods. So maybe the menu is chicken nuggets, mac and cheese, and green beans. Everybody has the same options. It's really important for your kids to feel like they're on the same level as you. So we pass around the chicken nuggets and the mac and cheese. They can put their own food on their plate. They can feel in control of what they're about to eat. And then if it's a food that they're not so familiar with, say the green beans, for example, are not a food that your child eats at that moment, what I love to use is a learning plate. So we'll have a learning plate in the middle of the table, and If you can tell your child is about to fall apart once that green bean comes around and it's coming to his turn. And if he's completely falling apart, that's okay, that's okay. We can put your food on the learning plate. We're still learning about this food. We can put it on the learning plate. And what that means is that there's no expectation of eating it. You know, he just has to put that food on the learning plate, or even help you, or you can do it while he's watching, depending on where he's at. And then that learning plate in the middle of the table, we can still talk about it, we can still reference it. It's there in the room, it's on the table. That's automatically interacting, or I guess visually tolerating the food in their space and in their room. And the hope is that the next couple dinner times, as we keep passing around those green beans, the hope is that maybe one time he can put it on his plate and tolerate it in his space closer. Or maybe one time he can put it on his plate and then he'll be he's so familiar with it that he's like, I wonder what this tastes like. It's a journey and it's a slow process, but the learning plate is a really great way to remove that stress of you have to eat this food and to start at a lower step where they're at. Parents are the role models. You know, no fake eating. Kids know. Kids know when you fake eating that chicken nugget. So what really an important part is solidarity. You and the child, y'all are both eating the same foods together and reinforcing every good step they take. Say that green bean, that kid one day picks it up and kind of like licks it. Oh my gosh, great job. I love how you lick that green bean. That's so good. Makes me so happy when you lick those green beans and making a big deal about it. These kids light up when you make a big deal about them doing something difficult. So definitely reinforcing every good step, even if it's not a complete chew, swallow, eat of the food. Communication, we want positive communication, using you can language. You can sit down at the table, oh, you can pass me that broccoli. You know, saying things that they can do gives them the expectation of what they need, but it also keeps everything positive. You know, we don't want to stress like negative communication during meal times. We want meal times to be positive and fun. So another thing that we can do is, you know, I love it when you take that food and you smell it. I really think it's great when you take that food and you hand it to your brother. Putting everything in a way that it can be remembered by the child as that, oh, I did that and that was good. You know, that's what's important in creating an atmosphere of fun at each mealtime. And I especially love, good job making a moo with your cracker. That's one of the ones from the SOS approach to feeding, and that's a really creative way of saying, good job taking a bite. But it's fun, you know, good job making a moon. Oh, I see that moon. Oh, we're going to put it in the sky. And putting it to a play scheme is really successful. If our child is getting distracted, or if we start talking about a different food that they want that food all the time, what we can do is just try to bring it back and redirect to the food that we're eating and stall. You know, say your child wants that chicken nugget. Okay, I'm warming them up in the microwave, but you can touch that broccoli and hand it to your sister while I'm doing it, like stalling as much as you can, just to increase the amount of time in which they will interact with a different food before you present that familiar food that they desire. As you're eating it, you know, educate the child about the food and what it's happening. Ooh, this is crunchy. Oh, this is soft and cold. Talk about it. Talk about what it feels like. Pair those words with what those foods are like and what that experience is going to be like for them. Help describe it. Using those kinds of language, especially if the child maybe has a negative reaction or gags or shudders or does something upon the taste, you want it to be positive. You want it to, oh my gosh, that tickles your tongue, doesn't it? You know, say something a little more positive rather than freaking out and harping on the negative. It's a really great way to have these kids positively experience food. So I included some ways to play. These are all my success stories of play schemes. There's some that don't go over so well, but these are pretty good. We do rolling and spinning. So say we're doing apples, oranges, fruit. We roll it across the table. It becomes a ball game. So fun. We don't have to open it yet. And then maybe we can slowly open it. Spinning. For our kids that like to see things spin, I spin that fruit, spin that vegetable. And really, after a couple times, I'll cut it open and I'll spin a piece. I'll spin like a spear of food. So taking what your child likes to do and likes to concentrate on or likes to participate in, make it a game with food. Crowd favorite right now is currently the rocket ship in the play group that I'm doing, the feeding group. So what I do is I take the food, I go 10, 9, 8, all the way down to 1, and then the food blasts off, and it can land on my arm, or it can land on my shoulder, or on my nose, or on my lips. And food that kids don't want anywhere near their mouth, they'll put a rocket ship near their mouth, you know? So it changes up that scheme. It's not a scary apple anymore. It's a rocket ship. So when we play with it, even if they put the rocket ship on their lips, they're still experiencing that taste, and they're still experiencing that smell and that contact and interaction with the food. I love the no hands, like putting the food in my mouth. Look, no hands. Kids think that's so fun. A Great one too is sneezing. So going from that position to chew, and then dropping the food on the table. It's hilarious. So that's a really great way to help your kids put the foods in their mouth, right? I mean, if they get to sneeze it out onto the table, how great. And like I said, manners second. So, it's sneezing it out of our mouth, falling off of our head. The food's going to climb to the top and then fall off. Maybe the child would love to take the animal and climb to the top of the mountain and fall off. So there's really creative ways we can play with our food that incorporate using all of our senses. And I want to say a special note about cleanup. So cleanup is such a great way to interact with your food, because say we have that food on our learning plate, we have that food that we don't really want to eat, we will sure pick it up and throw it in the trash. We want it gone. So if we are participating in mealtime, whatever food's on our learning plate, okay, well you can help mom clean it up, let's put it in the trash can. And that child will be so motivated to pick that food up and throw it away forever. So that's a really great way. Cleanup is such a great way to progress up those steps of feeding. And maybe what I love to do too is I love to kiss it goodbye. Pick up that food, kiss it goodbye, put it in the trash can. What did they do? They just touched it with their mouth. So it's really important to kind of think of creative ways that your child can interact with these different foods. Feeding is a journey. It takes a long time to move up those steps. And that's something that's really important to tell parents. I just want to stress that it's when we talk about feeding therapy and moving up those steps to eating, it's child-led, and we want to always make it fun and positive, which means that we kind of follow their progression. So I always like to just tell parents, therapy follows the progression of normal feeding. It takes a baby about 2 years to fully gain the skills that it requires to eat. So if, feeding therapy is progressing and you feel like it's moving so slow, focus on those little steps. That's another reason why I like to pin that out, is because we can concentrate on the little steps that they're making, even if we're not to eating yet. If we're moving up, it's easy for parents to concentrate on the progress. Common issues. These are some of the issues that I see a lot and that parents kind of mention a lot. Pocketing. So pocketing is when the kiddo holds the food in their mouth and kind of keeps it there. We have a lot of kids that do this, and it could be for a number of reasons. One reason is that mechanically, in order to free the food from your cheek, you have to be able to move your tongue to the side. Like that. And so if our child has a deficit with those tongue oral motor movements, it's going to be hard mechanically to free up the food from their cheek in order to swallow. Another reason why pocketing can happen is if there's a sensory difficulty going on there. Either maybe we don't feel that the food's still in our mouth, we don't feel that it's there and it's kind of just staying there, or the opposite end, we do feel it, we very much don't like it on our tongue, so we are pushing it to the side and keeping it there because we don't want to deal with it. So when it comes to pocketing, we want to kind of assess what exactly is going on, whether it's an oral motor deficit or if it's kind of something sensory happening, and then we can match our therapeutic response to that. So say it's a difficulty with tongue lateralization. We might tell parents to use a sucker and have them lick the sucker to the side. Or if it's a problem with sensory, not feeling it's there, just kind of have them, oh look, you still have food right there. Let's move it, kind of tap on their cheek and bring awareness that they have food there. So there's definitely, we kind of, recommend our exercises based on what the exactly issue is with pocketing. Gagging. So a lot of our kids will gag at the sight, smell, touch of all these foods. So the important thing to think about is gagging is a very strong sensory response, but gagging is also mechanical. So if we're gagging based on the sight, on the texture, on the presentation of the food in the room, that isn't a sensory response. That is an oversensitivity to that food. If we're gagging with the touch of it to our tongue, that's a tongue thing, right? And so what we need to do is just totally not freak out. Gagging is scary and it's not comfortable for anybody, for the child, so we want to keep it positive. Like, oh, that's okay, I'm so proud of you for licking that food, good job. Completely move forward from it. Gagging is developmentally appropriate. When we're kids and we're learning, and babies, and we're learning how to eat food, we gag all the time. So for these picky eaters and problem eaters, they're just older, and so it's definitely not a fun experience, but we just want to do what we can to make it positive and to progress them forward. And the more that they put in their mouth, that's the way we're going to desensitize it. So the more we put, like maybe if you notice that your picky eater as a child never really put foods in their mouth or put toys in their mouth or played in an oral motor way, the more we put things in our mouth, that's how our gag reflex moves back. So there is ways that we can recommend as therapists how to kind of encourage and to fix these problems of gagging. Food jags. This one is huge. Food jag is when a child only wants to eat one food all day, every day, for every meal. It's normally a packaged food, doesn't always have to be, but that is that same reason, right? It's predictable. They know what they're going to get. The issue with food jags is that as parents, it's stressful, right? Because you want your kid to eat. Fine, let's eat the chicken nuggets because it is legitimately scary when your child is not eating and it's an issue. But I guess what everybody needs to know is that it leads to burnout. And like we talked about with our picky eaters and our problem feeders, that burnout can either go away after 2 weeks for our picky eaters, or for our problem feeders, they might not ever regain that food. So we really want to stay away from these food jags if our kid is going to want food all the time, and I'll kind of give you some strategies for that. So if your child, make a list. Every single food your child eats. Junk foods, stepping stone foods, or not. Make a list of everything. And we want to spread out that food jag. So for example, if we're jagging on a chicken nugget, we want to only introduce it every other day. So say chicken nuggets are available on Monday. They are not available on Tuesday. Tuesday is everything else that they eat. And then Wednesday, we can reintroduce the chicken nugget. We want to spread out the time that we make these foods available as much as we can. So if we don't have enough foods, say we only have 3 foods, and that's when it gets tricky, right? Because if you don't have many other options, what we can do is take our least nutritious food and change it somehow. So say the 3 foods that we eat are chicken nuggets, goldfish, and Oreos. So we can present them the chicken nuggets and the goldfish, and then when it comes to our Oreos, we break it. We change the shape. The next time we present the Oreos, maybe we change the color. It has like the holiday icing inside. The next time we present the Oreos, we change the taste. Maybe we buy an off-brand. Change the texture last. So maybe if your child doesn't have enough foods, but they're still continuing to jag, we just need to change the just right thing. Just big enough so that they notice that it happened, but just small enough so that they can still tolerate that change that we made. Special considerations for our kids 7 and older. If you have an older child, it's the same thing, incorporating play, incorporating meal prep. It's just at a higher caliber. So we just need to match our play and match our activities with these kiddos who love the logic, who love the science, who will make food experiments and dissect the food and make structures out of food. You just kind of need to change that play to match the older child. Help them learn how to fix the food. I love empowering those older kids. Like, I know you like sweet foods. These carrots aren't sweet. Maybe we can sprinkle some brown sugar on them and fix them for you so that they're sweeter. Helping them take ownership of it and coming up with ways that they can fix the food. So those are my strategies. They're, like I said, feeding I could talk about for months. So if these problem feeders sound like your child, like I said, first contact your pediatrician. Use that questionnaire if you need to guide that conversation. And then seek out occupational speech or behavior. We can really help in a lot of these areas. And I myself am trained for the SOS approach that I've talked about and introduced you to today, as is Lexi and Ashley. And we have a lot of professionals here tonight if you have any questions about that. So thank you for listening, and I hope